Captain Marcus Reynolds stood at the edge of the military base's mess hall, watching the evening meal service wind down. The clatter of trays and the murmur of conversation filled the large dining area as soldiers finished their dinners. His sharp eyes moved across the room, noting everything from the cleanliness of the tables to the efficiency of the serving line. This was his domain, and every detail mattered. At the serving counter, a woman in her mid-30s worked methodically, wiping down surfaces and organizing the remaining food. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform was spotless despite having worked through the dinner rush. Maria Santos had been the head cook of the mess hall for 3 years, and, in that time, she had transformed the quality of meals served to the 800 soldiers stationed at Fort Harrison. Captain Reynolds had always maintained a professional distance from the kitchen staff. To him, they were simply support personnel who kept his soldiers fed. He knew their names, their basic qualifications, and their work schedules, but nothing more. Maria Santos was no exception. She was efficient, punctual, and kept her kitchen running smoothly. That was all he needed to know. However, recent budget cuts had forced the captain to make difficult decisions. The base was under pressure to reduce costs, and the mess hall operations were consuming a significant portion of their allocated funds. The higher-ups had made it clear that changes needed to be made, and they needed to be made quickly. During his morning briefing with the base administrative officer, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the subject of cost reduction came up again. "Reynolds, we need to see a 20% reduction in mess hall expenses within the next quarter," she said, sliding a folder across his desk. "The numbers don't lie. We're spending too much on food services." Captain Reynolds opened the folder and reviewed the financial reports. The costs were indeed higher than other comparable bases, but he also knew that soldier satisfaction with meals had improved dramatically over the past few years. Still, orders were orders, and he had to find a way to cut expenses without compromising the nutritional needs of his troops. After studying the reports for several hours, he identified what he believed to be the primary issue. The head cook position carried a higher salary than similar positions at other bases, and the current meal preparation methods, while producing better food, were more expensive than standard military fare. If he could replace the head cook with someone willing to work for less money and implement more cost-effective cooking methods, he could achieve the required savings. The decision wasn't personal, he told himself. It was simply a matter of military efficiency and budget management. Maria Santos would have to be dismissed, and they would find a replacement who could work within the new budget constraints. That afternoon, Captain Reynolds called Maria to his office. She entered with the same composed demeanor she always maintained, her posture straight and her expression attentive. She had no idea what was coming. "Santos, please have a seat," the captain said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. His tone was formal and businesslike, the same tone he used for all administrative matters. Maria sat down, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Yes, sir. Is there a problem with the kitchen operations?" Captain Reynolds cleared his throat and picked up a prepared document from his desk. "Santos, due to recent budget constraints and the need to reduce operational costs, I'm going to have to terminate your employment effective 2 weeks from today." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Her composure wavered for just a moment, and Captain Reynolds caught a glimpse of shock and hurt in her eyes before she regained control. "Sir, may I ask if this is related to my performance? Have there been complaints about the food quality or kitchen management?" "No, your performance has been adequate," the captain replied, though he knew it had been much more than adequate. "This is purely a financial decision. We need to restructure the kitchen operations to reduce costs." Maria nodded slowly, processing the information. "I understand, sir. Will you be needing me to train my replacement during these 2 weeks?" "We'll handle the transition internally," Captain Reynolds said, already eager to end the uncomfortable conversation. "Personnel will provide you with information about your final pay and benefits. You're dismissed." After Maria left his office, Captain Reynolds felt a slight pang of something he couldn't quite identify. He pushed it aside and focused on the practical aspects of finding a replacement. Within a week, he had hired Robert Martinez, a former military cook who was willing to work for significantly less money and had agreed to implement a more cost-effective menu using prepackaged and processed foods. Maria's last day arrived sooner than anyone expected. She had spent her final 2 weeks meticulously organizing her kitchen, creating detailed recipes and procedures for whoever would take over, and ensuring that all equipment was in perfect working order. She did this despite knowing that most of her work would likely be discarded in favor of the new, cheaper approach. On her final morning, Maria arrived early as she always did. She walked through the kitchen one last time, touching surfaces she had cleaned thousands of times, checking equipment she had maintained with pride, and looking at the small improvements she had made over the years. The kitchen had been her second home, and leaving it felt like losing a piece of herself. Several soldiers who had become accustomed to her cooking style approached her during her final service. Sergeant Williams, a career soldier with 15 years of service, stopped by the serving counter during lunch. "Santos, is it true you're leaving us?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "Yes, Sergeant. Today is my last day," Maria replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the emotion she felt. "That's a damn shame," Sergeant Williams said, shaking his head. "Your cooking reminded me of my grandmother's. Made this place feel a little more like home." Similar conversations occurred throughout the day as word spread among the soldiers. Many expressed their disappointment and thanked Maria for the care she had put into their meals. For most of them, the mess hall food had been one of the few comforts in their demanding military life. Captain Reynolds observed these interactions from a distance but told himself they were simply the natural resistance to change that occurred in any organization. The soldiers would adapt to the new cooking style, and the budget savings would justify the transition. As the day ended and Maria cleaned her station for the final time, she took off her apron and hung it on the hook where it had resided for 3 years. She gathered her personal items, a small collection of spices she had brought from home and a few kitchen tools that belonged to her, and placed them in a cardboard box. Captain Reynolds happened to be walking past the kitchen as Maria emerged with her box. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw something in her expression that made him pause. It wasn't anger or resentment, but a quiet dignity mixed with profound sadness. She nodded respectfully and said, "Good evening, Captain," before walking toward the exit. "Good evening, Santos," he replied, watching her leave. For a moment, he considered saying something more, perhaps acknowledging her years of service or wishing her well in her future endeavors. But military protocol and his own discomfort with emotional displays held him back. After Maria left, Captain Reynolds returned to his office to complete the paperwork related to her termination. As he filed the documents, he noticed that he had never actually looked at Maria's complete personnel file. He had reviewed her basic qualifications when she was hired, but he had never taken the time to read her full background. Curious, and perhaps feeling slightly guilty about the abrupt dismissal, he pulled up her file on his computer. What he found was a standard military contractor profile, previous work experience, education, references, and basic personal information. Nothing seemed particularly noteworthy, and Captain Reynolds felt reassured that he had made the right decision based on financial necessity. The next morning, Robert Martinez began his first day as the new head cook. He was a competent professional who understood the budget constraints and was committed to delivering meals within the specified cost parameters. The transition seemed to be going smoothly from an administrative perspective. However, by the third day of Martinez's tenure, Captain Reynolds began receiving complaints. Soldiers approached their squad leaders, who in turn brought concerns to their commanding officers. The food quality had declined significantly, they reported. Meals were bland, often undercooked or overcooked, and lacked the nutritional balance they had grown accustomed to under Maria's management. Captain Reynolds initially dismissed these complaints as the predictable resistance to change he had expected. He issued a memo reminding all personnel that adaptation periods were normal when implementing new operational procedures, and he expected their full cooperation during the transition. But the complaints continued and intensified. Soldiers began bringing their own food supplements, and some even started skipping meals entirely. Morale in the mess hall, which had previously been one of the more positive areas of base life, began to decline noticeably. Sergeant Williams approached Captain Reynolds directly during his weekly rounds. "Sir, with all due respect, the men are really struggling with the new food situation. We've had several soldiers get sick from undercooked meals, and the overall nutritional quality has dropped significantly." Captain Reynolds listened but remained firm in his position. "Sergeant, I understand there's an adjustment period. The new cook is working within necessary budget constraints. The soldiers will adapt." "Sir, Santos wasn't just cooking food. She was taking care of us," Sergeant Williams said earnestly. "She knew which soldiers had dietary restrictions, who was having a tough time and needed a little extra care, and she made sure everyone was properly fed. This new guy treats it like he's just heating up pre-made meals." These words struck Captain Reynolds more than he cared to admit, but he maintained his stance. The budget requirements were non-negotiable, and he had made the best decision available given the circumstances. 2 weeks into Martinez's tenure, the situation reached a critical point when 3 soldiers were hospitalized with food poisoning from improperly prepared chicken. The incident required a formal investigation, and Captain Reynolds found himself having to explain to his superiors why food safety protocols had been compromised. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called him into our office the morning after the incident. "Reynolds, what the hell happened in your mess hall? We've got soldiers in the hospital and a potential public relations nightmare on our hands." Captain Reynolds explained the budget constraints and the personnel changes he had implemented, emphasizing that the new cook had seemed qualified and committed to following safety protocols. "I don't care about his qualifications on paper," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes said firmly. "I care about results. And the results are that your soldiers are getting sick and morale is tanking. Fix this situation immediately." As Captain Reynolds left the meeting, he realized that his cost-cutting measures had created far more serious problems than they had solved. The financial savings meant nothing if soldiers were being hospitalized and the base's reputation was at risk. That evening, he sat in his office reviewing the incident reports and trying to determine his next course of action. The investigation had revealed multiple food safety violations and preparation errors that had occurred under Martinez's supervision. It was clear that the new cook, despite his credentials, was not capable of managing the complex demands of feeding 800 soldiers safely and effectively. For the first time since making the decision to dismiss Maria Santos, Captain Reynolds began to question whether he had acted too hastily. He had focused solely on the financial aspects of the situation without fully considering the broader implications of replacing an experienced and competent cook with someone who was cheaper but less skilled. As he worked late into the night, trying to develop a plan to address the crisis, Captain Reynolds found himself thinking about Maria's final day and the dignity with which she had accepted her dismissal. He wondered where she had found employment after leaving the base and whether she would even consider returning if he approached her. But before he could take any action regarding Maria, he needed to deal with the immediate crisis. He would have to dismiss Martinez and find a temporary solution while searching for a new head cook. The irony wasn't lost on him that his attempt to save money had resulted in a situation that would likely cost far more than he had saved, both financially and in terms of the base's reputation. 3 weeks had passed since the food poisoning incident, and Captain Reynolds was struggling to find a solution to the mess hall crisis. He had dismissed Robert Martinez immediately after the investigation revealed the extent of the safety violations, but finding a qualified replacement within budget constraints was proving nearly impossible. The base had been operating with temporary civilian contractors who charged premium rates for short-term services. Every day that passed without a permanent solution was costing the military more money than Maria Santos had ever been paid, but Captain Reynolds was reluctant to admit his mistake to his superiors. During this chaotic period, he had attempted to locate Maria Santos to gauge whether she might be interested in returning, but his initial inquiries had been unsuccessful. The personnel department had an address that was no longer current, and her emergency contacts had only outdated information. The pressure from above was mounting. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called daily meetings to discuss the mess hall situation, and word had reached the base commander that soldier morale and nutrition were suffering. Captain Reynolds found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to explain why a simple cost-cutting measure had spiraled into such a significant operational problem. On a particularly difficult morning, after receiving yet another complaint about meal quality from the base medical officer, Captain Reynolds decided to take a different approach. Instead of continuing to search for a new cook through normal military contractor channels, he would try to track down Maria Santos personally. He began by calling the references listed in her original personnel file. Most of the numbers were disconnected or belonged to people who had lost touch with Maria, but he eventually reached her former supervisor from a restaurant where she had worked before joining the base kitchen staff. Maria Santos? Oh yes, I remember her well, said Elena Rodriguez, the former restaurant manager. Excellent cook, very reliable. She left here to take the position at your base. Why are you asking about her now? Captain Reynolds explained that he was trying to reach Maria regarding a potential opportunity, carefully avoiding the details of why she had left in the first place. Elena provided him with the phone number of Maria's sister, who might have current contact information. When Captain Reynolds called Carmen Santos, Maria's younger sister, he could hear the suspicion in her voice immediately. You're calling about my sister? The same Captain Reynolds who fired her 3 weeks ago? Carmen's tone was cold and protective. Maria told me exactly what happened. You dismissed her without cause to save money, and now you want to find her? Why should I help you? The accusation stunned because it was entirely accurate. Captain Reynolds had dismissed Maria purely for financial reasons, despite her excellent performance. He realized that any attempt to contact Maria would require him to acknowledge his mistake and, possibly offer some form of explanation or apology. Ma'am, I understand your sister may have concerns about the circumstances of her departure, Captain Reynolds said carefully. I would like the opportunity to discuss a new situation with her. There have been changes in our operational needs. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Maria has moved on, Captain. She's found other work, and she's trying to rebuild her life after you threw it upside down. But, I'll give her your message. Whether she chooses to call you back is entirely up to her. After hanging up, Captain Reynolds realized that tracking down Maria was only the first challenge. Even if he could reach her, he would have to convince her to return to a position from which she had been unfairly dismissed, and he would have to do so while maintaining his authority and admitting his error without appearing weak to his subordinates and superiors. 2 days later, his office phone rang during the afternoon. When he answered, a familiar voice spoke quietly on the other end. Captain Reynolds? This is Maria Santos. My sister said you called looking for me. Captain Reynolds felt a moment of relief followed immediately by uncertainty about how to approach the conversation. Santos, yes, thank you for calling back. I wanted to discuss a potential opportunity with you. What kind of opportunity? Maria's voice was neutral, giving away nothing about her feelings or intentions. We're looking for a new head cook for the mess hall, Captain Reynolds said, deciding to be direct rather than dancing around the issue. The person we hired to replace you didn't work out, and we need someone with experience managing a kitchen of this size. There was a long pause before Maria responded. Captain, you dismissed me 3 weeks ago because you said my position was too expensive. What has changed? This was the moment Captain Reynolds had been dreading. He would have to acknowledge that his decision had been flawed without completely undermining his authority. The budget situation has been re-evaluated, he said carefully. We've determined that experience and quality are worth the investment. Another pause. I see. And what makes you think I would be interested in returning to a position where I could be dismissed again whenever budget concerns arise? The question was fair and difficult to answer. Captain Reynolds realized that Maria had no reason to trust him or believe that her position would be secure if she returned. He would need to offer her something more than just her old job back. Santos, I'll be direct with you, he said, abandoning his carefully planned approach. The dismissal was a mistake on my part. I focused on budget numbers without properly considering the value of your contribution to the base operations. If you were willing to return, I would ensure that your position was secure and properly valued. For the first time in the conversation, Maria's voice showed a hint of emotion. Captain, do you have any idea what the last 3 weeks have been like for me? I had to move out of my apartment because I couldn't make rent. I've been staying with my sister and working temporary jobs just to survive. You didn't just take away my job, you turned my entire life upside down. The reality of what his decision had cost Maria personally hit Captain Reynolds harder than he had expected. He had thought of the dismissal as a simple administrative action, but Maria was describing genuine hardship and upheaval that had resulted from his choice. "I understand that my decision had serious personal consequences for you," he said quietly. "I should have handled the situation differently, and I should have considered alternatives before resorting to termination." Maria was quiet for several moments. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful rather than angry. "Captain, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you calling because you recognize that I'm good at what I do, or are you calling because you're in trouble and you need someone to fix the mess?" The question forced Captain Reynolds to confront his true motivations. Was he reaching out to Maria because he had gained a genuine appreciation for her skills, or simply because he needed her to solve his current crisis? The honest answer was probably both, but Maria deserved better than that. "Both," he admitted. "I'm calling because we have a serious problem that needs to be solved, and I believe you're the person who can solve it. But I'm also calling because I've learned something about the value of your work that I didn't understand before." "What have you learned?" Captain Reynolds thought about the past 3 weeks, the complaints from soldiers, the food safety violations, and the general decline in morale around mealtimes. "I learned that cooking for 800 people isn't just about preparing food efficiently. It's about understanding nutrition, maintaining safety standards, managing complex logistics, and caring for the people you're feeding. The person we hired to replace you had the basic qualifications, but he didn't have your understanding of what the job really requires." Maria listened without commenting, and Captain Reynolds continued. "I also learned that the soldiers saw you as more than just the person who prepared their meals. They trusted you to take care of them, and that trust made a real difference in their daily lives here on the base." "The soldiers were always kind to me," Maria said softly. "I enjoyed taking care of them." Captain Reynolds could hear in her voice that she genuinely missed the work and the people, despite the way her employment had ended. This gave him hope that she might be willing to return under the right circumstances. "Santos, if you were willing to consider returning, I would like to offer you not just your previous position, but an improved situation," he said. "I would increase your salary to reflect the true value of your work, provide you with additional support staff to help manage the kitchen operations, and give you a formal contract that protects your position from future budget-related dismissals." The offer was more than Captain Reynolds had originally intended to propose, but he realized that Maria held all the leverage in the situation. She had proven her worth, and his attempt to replace her had failed spectacularly. If he wanted her back, he would have to make it worth her while and address her legitimate concerns about job security. "I appreciate the offer, Captain," Maria said after considering his words. "But I need time to think about it. What you're describing sounds positive, but I need to decide whether I'm ready to trust you again." Captain Reynolds understood her hesitation completely. "Take whatever time you need. Can I ask when you might have an answer?" "Give me until Friday," Maria said. "I'll call you by end of business day with my decision." After hanging up, Captain Reynolds felt cautiously optimistic but also anxious about whether Maria would accept his offer. He spent the remainder of the week trying to manage the ongoing mess hall crisis while waiting for her decision. During this time, he found himself paying closer attention to the daily operations of the kitchen and the impact of meal service on soldier morale. He observed how the temporary contractors treated their work as simply a job to be completed, while Maria had approached it as a responsibility to care for the people she fed. He also took time to review Maria's personnel file more thoroughly than he had before. What he discovered surprised him. Maria had excellent references from previous employers, additional certifications in nutrition and food safety that exceeded military requirements, and commendations from soldiers who had written letters praising her work during her 3 years at the base. Friday afternoon arrived, and Captain Reynolds found himself checking his phone repeatedly, waiting for Maria's call. As the end of business day approached, he began to worry that she had decided against returning and simply wasn't going to call. At 4:47 p.m., his phone rang. "Captain Reynolds? This is Maria Santos." "Santos, thank you for calling back. Have you made a decision?" "I have," Maria said, her voice steady and confident. I'll accept your offer, but I have some conditions of my own. Captain Reynolds felt relief wash over him. What conditions? First, I want the improved contract you mentioned in writing before I start work. Second, I want authority to make changes to kitchen operations and menu planning without having to get approval for every decision. Third, I want a clear chain of command that protects kitchen staff from interference by personnel who don't understand food service operations. All of her conditions were reasonable, and Captain Reynolds realized they would actually help him manage the kitchen more effectively in the future. I agree to all of those conditions. When can you start? Monday morning, Maria said. But, Captain, I want you to understand something. I'm not coming back just to return to the way things were before. I'm coming back to build something better. If you're not prepared to support that, then this won't work. Captain Reynolds recognized that Maria was setting expectations for their working relationship that went beyond simple employer-employee dynamics. She was requiring him to respect her expertise and trust her judgment in ways that he hadn't before. I understand, he said. You'll have my full support. Then, I'll see you Monday morning, Maria said. And, Captain? Thank you for acknowledging your mistake. That means something to me. After the call ended, Captain Reynolds felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the crisis would soon be resolved, respect for Maria's professionalism in handling a difficult situation, and a lingering sense of guilt about the hardship his original decision had caused her. He spent the weekend preparing for Maria's return, drafting the improved employment contract, arranging for the additional support staff he had promised, and informing his superiors that the mess hall situation was about to be resolved. On Monday morning, Captain Reynolds was waiting in his office when Maria arrived at the base. She looked professional and confident, carrying a briefcase and wearing a crisp white chef's coat that she had brought from home. When she knocked on his office door, he stood to greet her formally. Santos, welcome back. Thank you, Captain, she replied with a slight smile. I'm ready to get to work. Maria's first day back in the mess hall kitchen was unlike anything Captain Reynolds had expected. Instead of simply resuming her previous routine, she arrived with a detailed plan for completely reorganizing the kitchen operations and implementing new systems that would improve both efficiency and food quality. Within her first hour, she had identified and addressed 3 safety violations left over from Martinez's brief tenure, reorganized the food storage areas to prevent cross-contamination, and begun training the kitchen staff on proper food handling procedures. Captain Reynolds watched from a distance as she moved through the kitchen with purpose and authority, clearly in her element. By lunch service, word had spread throughout the base that Maria Santos was back. Soldiers who had grown accustomed to the poor quality meals of the past month lined up eagerly to see what she had prepared for them. Even with limited time and resources, Maria had managed to create a meal that was significantly better than what they had been eating. Sergeant Williams was among the first soldiers to approach the serving line. When he saw Maria behind the counter, his face broke into a genuine smile. Santos. They brought you back, he said with obvious pleasure. I knew Captain Reynolds would come to his senses eventually. Maria smiled warmly but kept her response professional. It's good to be back, Sergeant. I hope you enjoy today's meal. As soldiers moved through the line, Captain Reynolds observed their interactions with Maria. There was a warmth and familiarity that he hadn't noticed before, and he began to understand what Sergeant Williams had meant when he said that Maria took care of the soldiers. She remembered individual preferences, asked about soldiers who had been absent from previous meals, and made small adjustments to portions based on each person's needs. After the lunch service, Captain Reynolds approached Maria in the kitchen as she was preparing for dinner. Santos, I wanted to check on how your first day back is going. It's going well, Captain, Maria replied while continuing to work. The kitchen equipment is in good condition, and the staff is eager to learn proper procedures. I should be able to get operations back to full standard within a week. Captain Reynolds nodded, impressed by her confidence and efficiency. Is there anything you need from me to support your efforts? Maria paused in her work and looked at him directly. Actually, yes. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you later this week to discuss some changes I want to implement. I have ideas for improving nutrition, reducing food waste, and actually saving money without compromising quality. The offer intrigued Captain Reynolds. One of his ongoing concerns was finding ways to manage costs while maintaining the improved morale and nutrition that Maria's cooking provided. I'm very interested in hearing your ideas. How about Thursday afternoon? Perfect, Maria said. I'll prepare a presentation for you. Over the next few days, Captain Reynolds found himself paying more attention to the mess hall operations than he ever had before. He noticed that mealtimes had become more pleasant and relaxed, with soldiers lingering longer to talk with friends and showing genuine appreciation for their food. The complaints that had dominated the past month disappeared entirely, and he began receiving compliments about the improved meal quality from squad leaders. Thursday afternoon arrived, and Maria knocked on Captain Reynolds' office door carrying a folder and several sample containers. She had prepared for their meeting with the same thoroughness she applied to everything else. Captain, I wanted to share some ideas I have for improving our operations, she began, opening her folder to reveal detailed charts and cost analyses. I believe we can actually reduce our food costs while improving nutrition and soldier satisfaction. Captain Reynolds leaned forward with interest. How is that possible? Maria began laying out her plans systematically. First, by purchasing ingredients in bulk directly from regional suppliers rather than through military contractors, we can reduce food costs by approximately 15% while getting fresher, higher quality ingredients. She showed him detailed comparisons of costs and nutritional values, explaining how her approach would save money while providing better meals. Second, by implementing a more sophisticated menu planning system, we can reduce food waste significantly. I've calculated that we're currently throwing away about 20% of the food we prepare because portions aren't properly matched to actual consumption. Captain Reynolds studied her numbers with growing amazement. Not only was Maria proposing to solve his quality problems, but she was offering to do it while saving more money than his original cost-cutting measures would have achieved. These numbers are impressive, he said. But how do we know these savings will actually materialize? Maria reached for one of the containers she had brought. I prepared sample meals using my proposed methods and calculated the exact costs. Would you like to try them? Captain Reynolds nodded, and Maria opened the containers to reveal 3 different meals that looked and smelled significantly better than the standard military fare. As he tasted each one, he was struck by the difference in quality and flavor. This is remarkable, he said honestly. These meals are far superior to what we've been serving, but you're saying they cost less to produce? Exactly, Maria confirmed. The key is understanding how to use ingredients efficiently, plan menus that complement each other to minimize waste, and work with suppliers who provide value rather than just convenience. Captain Reynolds realized that Maria possessed knowledge and skills that went far beyond basic cooking. She understood nutrition, logistics, cost management, and supply chain optimization in ways that could benefit the entire base operation. Santos, I have to ask why you didn't propose these ideas before, he said. Maria's expression became more serious. Captain, with respect, you never asked for my ideas before. In my previous position, I was expected to follow predetermined menus and procedures. I wasn't given authority to make changes or suggestions about how operations could be improved. The observation stung because it was accurate. Captain Reynolds realized that he had never considered Maria as anything more than someone who followed orders and prepared food. He had never thought to ask whether she might have insights that could improve the overall operation. You're right, he admitted. I should have recognized your expertise and asked for your input. Going forward, I want your recommendations on any changes that could improve our operations. Maria nodded appreciatively. I have several other ideas I'd like to discuss, but they would require more significant changes to how we operate. Such as? I'd like to implement a nutrition education program for the soldiers, establish relationships with local farms to provide fresh vegetables, and create special meal options for soldiers with dietary restrictions or those recovering from injuries or illness. Each suggestion demonstrated Maria's understanding that her role could extend far beyond simply preparing food. She saw opportunities to improve soldier health, support the local community, and provide personalized care that could significantly impact morale and well-being. Captain Reynolds found himself reconsidering many of his assumptions about military food service. He had always viewed it as a necessary but basic function, but Maria was describing it as an opportunity to enhance soldier readiness, health, and satisfaction. "These are ambitious ideas," he said. "Some of them would require approval from higher up the chain of command." "I understand that," Maria replied. "But I believe they would produce measurable improvements in soldier health and performance that would justify the investment. I'd be happy to develop detailed proposals if you think there's a possibility of implementation." Captain Reynolds was impressed not only by Maria's ideas but by her systematic approach to proposing them. She clearly understood military decision-making processes and was prepared to work within the system to achieve her goals. "I want you to develop those proposals," he said. "I'll review them and determine which ones we can implement independently and which ones need higher approval." As their meeting concluded, Captain Reynolds felt that his relationship with Maria had fundamentally changed. Instead of viewing her as a subordinate who followed orders, he now saw her as a valuable advisor whose expertise could significantly improve base operations. Over the following weeks, Maria implemented her immediate cost-saving measures and began developing the more comprehensive proposals she had discussed. The results were impressive and immediate. Food costs dropped by the promised 15% while meal quality improved noticeably. Soldier satisfaction surveys showed the highest ratings in the base's history. More importantly, Captain Reynolds began to see broader impacts of improved food service on base morale and performance. Soldiers were more energetic, complained less about minor issues, and seemed generally more satisfied with their military experience. The mess hall had become a gathering place where soldiers looked forward to spending time, rather than simply a necessity they endured. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes noticed the improvements during her weekly visits to the base. "Reynolds, whatever you've done to fix the mess hall situation has had a remarkable impact," she commented during one of their regular meetings. "Soldier satisfaction scores are up across the board, and we're getting fewer complaints about quality of life issues." Captain Reynolds felt pride in the improvements but also recognized that the credit belonged to Maria. "We brought back our previous head cook and gave her authority to implement improvements," he explained. "She's proven to be far more valuable than I initially recognized." "Good work," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes said. "Sometimes the best personnel decisions involve recognizing and correcting our mistakes." The comment made Captain Reynolds reflect on how much he had learned from the entire experience. His initial decision to dismiss Maria had been based on narrow financial considerations without understanding the full value of her contribution. The crisis that followed had forced him to confront the limitations of his perspective and ultimately led to a much better outcome than what had existed before. During his regular walks through the base, Captain Reynolds began stopping by the mess hall more frequently, not to inspect or supervise, but to observe the positive atmosphere Maria had created. He watched soldiers enjoying their meals, engaging in relaxed conversations, and showing genuine appreciation for the care that went into their food preparation. One evening, as he observed the dinner service, Sergeant Williams approached him. "Captain, I wanted to thank you for bringing Santos back," he said. "The men were really struggling during those weeks when the food was so poor. It made everything else feel harder. Having good meals to look forward to makes a real difference in how we handle the challenges of military life." Captain Reynolds nodded, understanding now what he had failed to grasp before. "Sergeant, I'm beginning to realize that I underestimated the importance of the mess hall operations to overall base morale and effectiveness." "Sir, soldiers have a saying that an army marches on its stomach," Sergeant Williams said with a slight smile. "Santos understands that. She knows that feeding people well is about more than just nutrition. It's about showing care and respect." As Captain Reynolds walked back to his office that evening, he reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past 2 months. What had begun as a simple cost-cutting measure had evolved into a comprehensive improvement of base operations and a fundamental change in his understanding of leadership and the value of expertise. 6 months had passed since Maria's return to the mess hall, and the transformation of the base's food service had become a model for other military installations. Word of the improvements at Fort Harrison had reached Regional Command, and Captain Reynolds found himself fielding calls from other base commanders asking for advice on improving their own meal operations. During this period, Captain Reynolds had developed a completely different relationship with Maria Santos. What had begun as a standard supervisor-employee dynamic had evolved into a professional partnership where Maria's expertise was recognized and valued. She now participated in weekly planning meetings with other department heads, and her insights on soldier nutrition and morale had influenced decisions far beyond the mess hall. The success of Maria's initiatives had been remarkable. Her nutrition education program had reduced sick days by 12% as soldiers made better food choices both on and off base. The relationship she had established with local farms had not only improved meal quality but had also strengthened community relations between the base and surrounding area. Most significantly, her specialized meal programs for soldiers with dietary restrictions and those recovering from injuries had demonstrated measurable improvements in recovery times and overall health outcomes. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had been so impressed with the results that she had recommended Fort Harrison as a pilot site for a new military nutrition initiative. The recommendation had attracted attention from Pentagon officials who were interested in replicating the base's success across the entire military system. One morning in late spring, Captain Reynolds received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel James Morrison, a senior officer from Military Personnel Command. "Reynolds, I'm calling about your head cook, Maria Santos," Colonel Morrison said without preamble. "We've been reviewing the improvements at your base, and we want to offer her a position as a regional nutrition coordinator. She would be responsible for developing and implementing improved food service programs across multiple bases in the region." Captain Reynolds felt his stomach drop. The offer represented a significant promotion and opportunity for Maria, but it also meant losing the person who had transformed his base's operations. "Sir, that's certainly a significant opportunity for Santos," Captain Reynolds replied carefully. "Have you spoken with her about this position?" "Not yet. Military protocol requires that we discuss the opportunity with her commanding officer first. We want to ensure this transfer would be acceptable from an operational standpoint." Captain Reynolds realized he was facing a difficult choice. From Maria's perspective, the regional position would be a major career advancement with increased responsibility and, undoubtedly, better compensation. From his own perspective, losing Maria would mean losing the expertise and leadership that had made the mess hall improvements possible. But, more than that, Captain Reynolds had come to respect Maria as a professional and as a person. After everything she had been through, including his own initial misjudgment and the hardship it had caused her, he knew he couldn't stand in the way of her advancement. "Colonel, I believe Santos would be an excellent choice for that position," Captain Reynolds said. "She has demonstrated exceptional expertise in nutrition planning, cost management, and program implementation. I would recommend her without reservation." "Excellent. We'll be in touch with her directly to discuss the opportunity. Thank you for your cooperation, Reynolds." After hanging up, Captain Reynolds sat in his office contemplating the implications of Maria's potential departure. Over the past months, he had learned to rely on her expertise and judgment in ways that went far beyond her formal job responsibilities. She had become an integral part of his leadership team, and her loss would be significant both operationally and personally. He also realized that he needed to tell Maria about the call before she heard about the opportunity through other channels. This conversation would be as difficult as the one where he had originally dismissed her, but for entirely different reasons. That afternoon, Captain Reynolds asked Maria to meet with him in his office. When she arrived, he could see curiosity in her expression, but also a slight wariness that reminded him of their previous difficult conversations. "Santos, I received a call this morning from Colonel Morrison at Personnel Command," he began. "They want to offer you a position as Regional Nutrition Coordinator." Maria's eyebrows rose in surprise. "A regional position? I wasn't aware such positions existed." Captain Reynolds explained what he knew about the role and the responsibilities it would entail. As he spoke, he watched Maria's expression change from surprise to interest to careful consideration. "This sounds like a significant opportunity," she said thoughtfully. "But I have to ask why you're telling me about it instead of them calling me directly." Military protocol requires them to discuss potential transfers with commanding officers first, Captain Reynolds explained. They wanted to ensure I would support your advancement. Maria studied his expression carefully. And, do you support it? The question was more complex than it appeared. Captain Reynolds knew that supporting Maria's advancement was the right thing to do, both for her career and for the military's broader goals. But he also knew that losing her would create significant challenges for his base operations. Santos, this position would be a tremendous opportunity for you, he said honestly. Your work here has proven that you have the expertise and leadership skills to succeed in a much larger role. I would be selfish to try to hold you back from advancing your career. But? Maria prompted, sensing there was more he wanted to say. Captain Reynolds paused, choosing his words carefully. But, I'll be honest with you. Losing you would be a significant setback for our operations here. You've built something special in our mess hall, and finding someone who can maintain what you've created won't be easy. Maria nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty, Captain. And I appreciate that you're supporting my opportunity for advancement. That means a lot to me. You've earned it, Captain Reynolds said simply. The question is whether this is what you want to do. I don't know yet, Maria admitted. I love the work I'm doing here, and I've built relationships with the soldiers that are important to me. But this regional position could allow me to help more people and have a broader impact on military nutrition programs. Captain Reynolds recognized the dilemma she was facing. It was similar to many career decisions where advancing meant leaving behind work and relationships that were personally meaningful. Take whatever time you need to consider the opportunity, he said. And if you decide to accept it, I'll do everything I can to ensure a smooth transition. Over the next week, Maria thought carefully about the decision while continuing her daily work in the mess hall. Captain Reynolds noticed that she seemed more reflective than usual, and he occasionally caught her looking around the kitchen and dining area as if seeing them with new eyes. During this time, word about the potential opportunity began to circulate among the soldiers, though Captain Reynolds wasn't sure how they had learned about it. Military bases were small communities where news traveled quickly, especially when it involved popular personnel. Several soldiers approached Maria directly to express their concerns about her possible departure. Sergeant Williams was particularly vocal about his feelings. Santos, please tell me you're not really thinking about leaving us, he said during lunch service one day. We just got you back, and now they want to take you away again? Maria smiled warmly but kept her response non-committal. Nothing's been decided yet, Sergeant. But I appreciate that you care about what happens to the kitchen. It's not just the kitchen, Sergeant Williams replied seriously. You've become part of what makes this base feel like home. The way you take care of us, remember our preferences, and always make sure everyone is well fed. That's not something you can easily replace. These conversations weighed heavily on Maria's mind as she considered her decision. She had genuinely grown to love her work at Fort Harrison and had developed meaningful relationships with many of the soldiers. The thought of starting over at a regional level, where her work would be more administrative and less personal, was both exciting and concerning. On Friday afternoon, Maria knocked on Captain Reynolds' office door. When she entered, he could see from her expression that she had made her decision. Captain, I've thought carefully about the regional position, she began. It's a tremendous opportunity, and I'm honored that they would consider me for it. Captain Reynolds felt his heart sink, anticipating what was coming next. But I've decided to decline the offer, Maria continued. I want to stay here at Fort Harrison. Captain Reynolds felt a mixture of relief and surprise. Santos, are you sure about this decision? This type of opportunity might not come again. I'm sure, Maria said with confidence. I believe I can have more real impact here, working directly with soldiers and continuing to develop programs that improve their daily lives. The regional position would be primarily administrative, and that's not where my strengths lie. Captain Reynolds admired her self-awareness and commitment to meaningful work over career advancement. I have to ask if my conversation with you about the operational impact of your leaving influenced your decision. I don't want you to feel pressured to stay because of the base's needs. Maria shook her head. Your honesty was appreciated, but it didn't determine my decision. I'm staying because this is where I want to be and where I believe I can do my best work. In that case, I'm very glad you're staying, Captain Reynolds said with genuine relief. But I want to make sure you're properly recognized for your contributions. I'm going to recommend you for a Civilian Service Award, and I want to discuss ways to expand your responsibilities here so you can continue to grow professionally. Thank you, Captain. I'd like that. As Maria left his office, Captain Reynolds reflected on how much had changed since the difficult morning when he had dismissed her for budget reasons. Not only had Maria transformed the base's food service operations, but she had also helped him become a better leader by teaching him to recognize and value expertise wherever it existed. That evening, Captain Reynolds wrote his response to Colonel Morrison, explaining that Maria Santos had declined the regional position in order to continue her work at Fort Harrison. He also included a detailed report on her contributions to the base and a recommendation that similar positions be created at individual bases rather than only at the regional level. Several weeks later, Captain Reynolds received a response that exceeded his expectations. Based on his recommendations and the success of Fort Harrison's nutrition programs, Military Command had decided to create a new position classification for base nutrition coordinators. Maria would be the first person to hold this title, which came with increased authority, higher compensation, and formal recognition of her expertise. When Captain Reynolds shared this news with Maria, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. This is perfect, she said. I get to continue doing the work I love while having my role officially recognized and expanded. There's one more thing, Captain Reynolds added with a slight smile. They want you to develop training materials and procedures that can be used to train other nutrition coordinators at bases throughout the military. Your work here is going to become the standard for the entire system. Maria looked stunned by the scope of the opportunity. Captain, that's far beyond anything I imagined when I first started working in this kitchen. You've earned every bit of it, Captain Reynolds replied. Your dedication, expertise, and care for the soldiers have created something remarkable here. Now others will have the chance to learn from what you've accomplished. 6 months later, Fort Harrison hosted its first regional conference on military nutrition coordination. Base commanders and kitchen staff from across the region came to observe Maria's programs and learn about implementing similar initiatives at their own installations. Captain Reynolds opened the conference with a presentation about the transformation of Fort Harrison's food service operations. As he spoke about the journey from budget-driven decision-making to recognizing and valuing expertise, he caught sight of Maria in the audience, wearing her new nutrition coordinator uniform and looking confident and professional. During his presentation, Captain Reynolds shared the most important lesson he had learned from the experience. Military effectiveness depends not just on equipment and training, but on recognizing and supporting the expertise of every person who contributes to our mission. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from unexpected sources, and sometimes the biggest mistakes come from failing to ask for input from those who know their jobs best. After the conference, as visiting personnel departed and the base returned to its normal rhythm, Captain Reynolds and Maria walked through the mess hall during dinner service. The dining area was filled with soldiers enjoying their meals and engaging in animated conversations. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, a far cry from the institutional feeling that had characterized mealtimes before Maria's innovations. Santos, I have a confession to make, Captain Reynolds said as they observed the scene. When I first dismissed you, I thought of the mess hall as simply a place where soldiers consumed fuel for their bodies. I had no understanding of how important this space could be for morale, community, and overall well-being. Maria smiled thoughtfully. Captain, I think many people underestimate the importance of food in creating a sense of home and care. Cooking for someone is one of the most basic ways to show them that they matter. You've certainly proven that, Captain Reynolds replied. These soldiers know they're valued because of the care you put into every meal. As they completed their walk through the dining area, Captain Reynolds reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a painful mistake had ultimately led to profound improvements not only in base operations but in his own understanding of leadership and the value of recognizing expertise wherever it exists. Maria Santos had not only returned to her position in the mess hall, she had transformed it into something that enhanced the lives of everyone on the base. And, in the process, she had taught Captain Reynolds lessons about leadership, humility, and the importance of seeing the full value of every person's contribution that would guide him throughout the rest of his military career.